One of my favorite 2023 moments of this broadcast was last month, was about a month or two ago, when I talked about schools banning YouTube. Here's a clip from that episode. Let's face it, when you want to watch an educational video, which website do you turn to? Do you turn to YouTube, Vimeo, Dailymotion, or from your social media posts? And let me tell you this, in the 7 years of this broadcast, there has never been a crazier issue that I've talked about than this issue we're talking about tonight. Schools banning YouTube. Well, not basically, it's just banned from laptops. I mean, it's like one of the craziest things ever. We'll show you the story in just a minute. Think about this. So when I was in school, you were not allowed to be on YouTube. The school did a thing where it would block all certain websites for students for all kids to not get on. Like Facebook, Twitter, all social media accounts, unless you had the mobile app. Now, back in 2012, 11 years ago, back in 2007, they decided to block YouTube because I don't know why. And then I heard from someone back in 2012 that they brought back YouTube. That would mean that everyone would get to see every video. Except in one school district you're about to see, in Greenville County, they're banning YouTube on all the school's laptops for them to not see inappropriate videos. Now, why is that? Take a look and you'll see. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would schools be banning YouTube if they just want to watch an educational video? It really does not make sense. If you look at it from, if you look at it from a perspective, it does not make sense. What if you want to watch an educational video like Bill Nye the Science Guy, or you're having a school project being put on? Greenville, Carolina. It's in Greenville County. One school is deciding to ban YouTube. But it's like this: you don't ban YouTube because you feel like it. Like, if you want to ban YouTube, okay. But you also have to understand the repercussions of your decision. If you try to understand the repercussions of your decision, maybe then you'll say to yourself, well, we really thought about it. We're not going to ban YouTube because people really need to watch their educational videos. We got Bill Nye the Science Guy. I mean, Bill Nye the Science Guy is on YouTube. You want to ban him? How about the Magic School Bus? You're going to ban Netflix? We have video games in our classrooms? Take a look at this clip.
Also, school leaders in Greenville County are working to keep students safe from potentially dangerous content. In fact, they are now blocking YouTube from all student devices. The district says the new policy comes after a recent change that allowed students to potentially access inappropriate content. Now, students cannot access YouTube from their Chromebooks at school or home. Teachers can go through a new process to get video used for educational purposes. The district says the new policy is meant to protect students online, and we do have more information about the policy on our website at foxcarolina.com.
Sure. Let's look at that policy. I showed you the story, but you have not seen their policy. Fair use, copyright laws, email, accordance students, consequences, personal safety. There's no mention of YouTube. But when you're dealing with issues like this, it's like, teachers banning pencils and pens in the classroom. No, let's read this. Let's read this memo. Students no longer be allowed to bring writing implements to school. It's saying pencils will be provided to students in class, and any students caught with pencil or pens after November 15th would face disciplinary action for having materials to build weapons. It just does not make any sense. Those two issues right there, they don't make any sense. Only in Carolina and Massachusetts. Only in those states, it makes sense. You don't ban pencils and pens. You want to ban technology, okay, but just have pencils and pens ready. But this teacher was running pencils and pens for her own good, and it was a lot safer. Again, it doesn't make any sense. Only in Massachusetts. That YouTube story, again, it doesn't make sense. Only in Carolina. Only in Carolina. So that's one of my favorite memories of 2023, when schools decided to ban YouTube on their laptops. How are you going to watch an educational video? You never know. Alright, this man devised up a plan to blow up the sheriff, and it landed him in jail with a fistful of audio tapes that thick. You'll hear his story when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's the kind of evidence that usually brings a criminal case to a quick end. In tonight's story, there are dozens of tapes that could prove useful or otherwise be deceitful. A man planning to blow up the toughest sheriff ever. This alleged target is that toughest sheriff. But as you're about to see, the tapes may reveal a different side of the story. As we first told you about this last season, the tapes were about this thick that some may have been deleted or shredded by the department. Here's Josh Mankiewicz.
With guns drawn, a man who investigators say wanted to kill Sheriff Joe Arpaio is arrested.
It was a shocking assassination attempt, captured on videotape. A teenage felon released from prison exactly 1 day earlier, arrested in a murder-for-hire plot, accused of conspiring to knock off one of the most high-profile lawmen in the country.
Nobody is going to drive me out of this office.
The intended victim, Joe Arpaio, self-proclaimed toughest sheriff in America. He's famous in Phoenix, Arizona and beyond for dressing inmates in old-fashioned jailhouse stripes, working them in chain gangs, feeding them on the cheap with bologna sandwiches, and making them live in tents under the broiling desert sun. The plot: build a pipe bomb packed with ball bearings and blast the sheriff to kingdom come. The perp: James Seville, an 18-year-old who had just finished a stretch in prison for trying to blow up a high school, now caught on tape building the bomb and laughing about blowing away Sheriff Joe.
Look like dead sheriff. Yes, it does.
Seville had no idea that he'd been under surveillance the whole time, or that his accomplice was really an undercover detective, or that the detective, whom Seville knew only as Yancey, secretly recorded their conversations that day.
I mean, I'm a real pyro, but I do like blowing things up. It's about time I get paid for it.
Seville had been arrested at the tender age of 17 for breaking into his former high school and trying to blow it up. Now he talked about much bigger plans than just murdering the sheriff.
I was planning on doing major damage to the city, because I figured I could cause an LA riot meeting there by taking out the power lines and the water. There's no electrical power. I shoot somebody in the head. How does this get to know?
The two men drove all over town so Seville could buy bomb parts, a pipe, batteries, wire, BBs to serve as shrapnel, model rocket motors he planned to grind up for the explosive charge. Seville sounded like a pro.
I like to go to all the stores. Nothing's traceable.
Yancey asked repeatedly if Seville wanted to back out.
Hey, you sure you want to do this, right? Yeah. Okay. You don't want to back out or anything? Now it's time to do it.
So the two men came here, the Los Olivos Motel in downtown Phoenix. Detectives had wired a room with hidden cameras, and Seville was caught on tape building the bomb. Seville assembled everything except the explosive charge itself. Yancey paid him half the agreed-upon fee of $4,000 cash.
40, 60, 85, $2,000.
Then the two men drove to a nearby restaurant where the sheriff's car was parked. Yancey asked Seville if he could kill the sheriff with a car bomb. Seville said sure.
That's when you put something under this car. Okay. Radio detonator. Hit the switch. Okay? Go on. And what are you going to do it with me? You know what that was? Well, I guess we'll have to.
But instead, it was Seville who got taken down. Sheriff's deputies rushed the car and grabbed him. Even hours later, as Seville was being interrogated, he couldn't seem to believe it.
Next thing I know, there's 100 police officers and helicopters and everything. And I'm up against the car and in another car, and I don't know what the hell happened. And
So that must tell you something, right?
yeah,
What's that tell you?
that I'm in deep.
A succinct assessment. Because if anybody ever seemed to be convicted on tape, it was James Seville. Even his lawyer, Ulysses Farragut, couldn't deny the obvious. A lot of criminal attorneys don't want to know whether their client did it, and they don't ask. Did you ask?
Didn't need to. He did it. Jimmy Seville built a bomb. He was caught on tape building a bomb.
But soon Farragut heard from his client an unbelievable story. That the mad bomber captured on audio and videotape was a fiction, an elaborate act, and that Seville went through with the bombing plot not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to.
And I'm looking at him with skepticism, saying, what are you talking about here? Let's get real. But as things began to unfold, we started being able to confirm the very things that Jimmy Seville was saying.
Blank, bedraggled. On TV, James Seville looked every inch the guilty party. But what if this time, just this once, the obviously guilty guy was telling the truth?
But could he be telling the truth? When we come back, you'll hear more of those audio tapes. You'll hear more from the attorney, and you will hear, and you'll hear the other side of the story from James Seville as the plot thickens. Stay with us. Return now to our story. James Seville might not be the type of person you want walking around your street. As you may recall, years ago, he was arrested for trying to blow up his high school. Now he's arrested for threatening to blow up the sheriff, America's toughest sheriff, for feeding him off bologna sandwiches. But was there more to the case than meets the eye? You're about to hear the chilling side of the story from James Seville himself, as he tells of a frightening incident that happened at his high school. Here again, Josh Mankiewicz.
This arrest of James Seville had been in the works for as long as a week.
The arrest led every evening newscast in Phoenix. James Seville had been caught on tape building a bomb to blow up Sheriff Joe Arpaio, one of the most popular elected officials in Arizona.
He'll kill whoever opens it. It's better than a hitman. The hitman can get caught.
If ever there was an open and shut case, this seemed to be it. Yet Seville claimed he was an innocent man, and trapped by others, acting under a death threat. Could he possibly be telling the truth?
Spend life in prison or being killed, I'd rather spend life in prison.
James Seville admits he set himself up for trouble years ago. Even though he had a strong aptitude for science and mechanics, he had trouble completing high school. Afterward, he had no direction at all. His single mom, Rebecca, couldn't keep track of him.
I had to be at work or we wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage. I pretty much had to let him try on his own to straighten up.
It didn't work.
And it didn't work.
In 1997, Seville and a friend broke into their old school, Maryvale High, hoping to steal science equipment and sell it.
We didn't think that far ahead because you didn't have anybody to sell it to, but
So this was disorganized crime.
yeah,
It got worse. The two boys lit a Bunsen burner in one room, then, without lighting them, turned on all the burners in the room next door, turning the building into a potential bomb. You know that turning gas on in one room and lighting a fire in the next room can produce a pretty sizable explosion.
we did it, but I wasn't thinking about actually the consequences of it, you know.
Investigators would later say the school was moments from exploding and taking a couple of police officers with it when firefighters turned off the gas. Seville claims he never wanted to hurt anyone, he was just going along with his buddy. So, would I be correct in saying you're easily influenced?
Yeah, I guess.
Somebody urges you to do something even if it might not be the right thing. Maybe you go along even though you shouldn't.
Yeah.
James Seville was arrested and pleaded guilty to attempted arson. He received a 1.5-year sentence with most of the time in juvenile detention. But when Seville turned 18, the state of Arizona sent him to adult prison, where he met a man who would make his previous troubles seem like child's play. Thomas Morgan was 34. He'd spent a good portion of those years behind bars. In Seville's mind, Morgan was no common thug. His crimes were financial fraud, white-collar stuff. To an inmate like James Seville serving time for a stupid crime, that made Morgan someone special. You looked up to him.
Well, you had to. I mean, when you're sitting next to him, it's like the mouse next to a lion.
Seville says he was eager to impress Morgan, and one day he got the chance when he and the older man watched a TV show about bomb squads. Seville says Morgan asked him if he could diagram a bomb. How do you know how to draw a bomb?
It's not hard. I know how to diagram. I used to do electronic circuits, you know, and I excel at science and math. I mean, you know, basic chemistry will teach you anything you want to know.
Seville says he and Morgan talked about other things too, like their criminal cases, the judges and prosecutors who put them away. They also discussed Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
He started talking about the sheriff and asked me what the best way to kill him was. And, you know, we're just joking.
Well, is that something people joke about in prison?
Yeah. Pretty much all the time.
But soon, Seville says, Morgan no longer seemed to be joking. Seville was getting out of prison in a week, and he says Morgan suggested he build a bomb and kill Arpaio. Morgan told you that killing Sheriff Arpaio would make you a hero?
That's just one of the things he said.
Seville claims Morgan told him he could make a lot of money for killing Sheriff Joe. Seville says Morgan badgered him to call a man on the outside named Yancey. Seville says he was reluctant but finally gave in. And so from prison, he called a number Morgan gave him. You say I made the phone call, and he says what?
He says, you just joined the mob.
You just joined the mob?
Yes.
And what'd you think?
Oh.
Now Jimmy Seville's story veers from merely improbable to completely unbelievable. He claims Morgan now told him that he, Morgan, was a crime boss, and that Yancey was one of his button men.
That Yancey was Irish Mafia hitman, and Morgan was an Irish mobster that was Yancey's boss. I was supposed to meet Yancey and do what he told me to do.
Why couldn't you just say, the hell with you, I'm getting out of here in a little while, and I don't want to be involved in anything like this?
All right, but would you tell Gotti, screw you, or Scarface or something like that? No.
You believed he was a mobster?
Yeah.
Seville was released from prison on July 8, 1999, and met Yancey the next day. He says he was convinced he had to, or else.
That's what you got to be for sheriff. My whole family. I hate that.
Was that all right?
It was.
Seville claims that all the bravado you've heard on these tapes made the day of his arrest, all his talk of being an expert bomb maker and lone psycho, all of that was really a desperate attempt to impress Yancey and through him Morgan, two men Seville thought were mobsters, and in so doing, save his own skin. You know, all apologies, but I think there's a case here that you were incredibly stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time, you know, you're thinking you're smart.
Yancey, he asked you flat out if you wanted to kill the sheriff, and you said yes. He said if you want to back out, now's the time, and you said you didn't want to.
See, there was other things there. I was told that there is no backing out.
Could Thomas Morgan possibly have had that kind of hold on Seville? And, even if he did, when you got out of prison, you're the guy that put the bomb components together, not him.
Yeah.
And you're the guy that got arrested for it.
Yeah.
And your defense is, it wasn't my idea, I was led to it by somebody else?
Yes.
But really, why should anyone believe Jimmy Seville? In order to do that, you have to believe that his cellmate, Thomas Morgan, cooked up a murder-for-hire plot, pressured Seville to go along, and even said he was a mobster to get Seville to comply. Under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and facing life in prison, Seville had every reason to concoct a story of entrapment. Even his own attorney was skeptical, except for one thing. How many hours of conversations did the sheriff's department record between Thomas Morgan and Jimmy Seville?
Roughly 139 hours.
And as you'll see, those hours and hours of audio tape cast a whole new light on the story of James Seville.
Coming up next, the audio tapes between the sheriff's department, coming up next, the audio tapes you're going to hear are between the person who's building the bomb, who's blowing out the bomb, and the person who's like, you want to back out? You want to back out now? Say hello to my little friend as the plot thickens. This is Scarface. Stay with us. Say hello to my little friend. Return now to our story. You've just seen the audio. You just heard the audio tapes between James Seville, Yancey, and Thomas Morgan. But now let's look at the tapes again through the eyes of the defense. Seville claims that he's not guilty because of all those tapes you're about to hear. But is he really telling the truth? Once again, Josh Mankiewicz.
Let's just say that for some reason you did Bob and Joe, and you blowing up the Joe. What kind of hero do you think he is?
You're listening to Thomas Morgan talking to his cellmate, James Seville. At the time, Seville had no idea that investigators had bugged the cell. But now he claims the tapes bear out his story that he was entrapped. That his sensational televised arrest for the attempted murder of a famous lawman was really a setup.
Morgan was smooth. He had always the right line. In a matchup against, 18-year-old Jimmy Seville, there was really no contest.
Seville's lawyer, Ulysses Farragut, says Thomas Morgan had informed on cellmates before in order to trade information for better treatment from his jailers. But in Seville's case, he claims, Morgan didn't just snitch. Farragut says Morgan actually made up the murder plot in order to finger Seville for it. He points to conversations like this one, in which Morgan seems to wake Seville out of a sound sleep to talk about murder. As the tape shows, Morgan brings up the sheriff. Morgan brings up a bomb. But Seville does mention sticking a pipe in his spokes, an apparent threat. Was Seville serious? Listen as the conversation continues. Does that sound like a bad joke? Remember, Seville says he was joking, but Morgan doesn't seem to get it. Just as Seville claimed, the tape shows Morgan also floated the idea of a murder for hire.
What
Remember, Seville claims Morgan then told him of a guy who worked for Morgan on the outside, a man named Yancey, who would hire Seville for the murder. Seville says that Morgan told him Yancey was a hitman. What did Morgan really say? And if Yancey was the enforcer, it seems, as Seville also claimed, that Morgan was the boss.
Let him help you because I got a place in my organization for you, but you got to prove yourself.
Seville told us he was reluctant to call Yancey, but Morgan badgered him to do it. Once again, the tape seems to bear him out.
Just call me. I'm worried about you not calling. I told him you would call me, and then you'll know how real I am. Just call.
One day before his release, Seville made the call, which was also tape recorded.
Yeah. Yeah, is this Yancey? Yeah. Yeah, this is Seville calling from Pedro. Hey, what's happening? Yeah, Tom told me to call you. He said, you might have work for me when I get out. Yeah, I think we can help each other out. Yeah.
As you recall, Seville claims that when he went back to his cell, Morgan told him he had just joined the mob, and now Seville had to kill the sheriff because Morgan's underworld reputation was on the line.
I'll tell you right now, you're expensive. I told you to help you, and you got to be faithful to the words that I said.
And he said, "Don't double-cross me,"
Don't double cross me, you know what will happen.
which means
You know what will happen. That was pretty much left up to my imagination.
But soon, Seville says, Morgan left nothing to the imagination, explicitly threatening Seville and his family if Jimmy didn't kill the sheriff. That's a key part of Seville's story and basic to his claim of entrapment.
You got a bad investigation, and you're about to arrest a person that has been coerced and threatened and entrapped into committing a crime.
But now we come to a key glitch in Jimmy Seville's story. Those threats aren't on the tape. As it happens, the tape's made right after the phone call, right at the time Seville claims Morgan threatened him, are either blank or silent. How could that happen? Seville's attorney says he had the recordings analyzed by an expert. The finding, the tapes were rolling the whole time, but
The volume was turned down so that you could not hear the conversation on the tape.
at critical points.
Yes,
Accidental or deliberate?
you tell me.
A staggering implication. It's one thing to think that a cellmate with a wild imagination cooked up a plot and got Seville in trouble, but to imply that investigators turned down their own tape recorders is to accuse them of participating in Thomas Morgan's scheme.
Recording devices fail sometimes.
Jack McIntyre is the legal counsel to Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the alleged victim of Seville's alleged plot. So if someone sees a sinister purpose in this, the sheriff's office may have either not recorded certain conversations or blanked out certain conversations. That's just paranoia.
They're the same people that are monitoring Area 51 and waiting for the spaceship to take off every moment of every day.
He has a point. Of course, Seville's tales about Morgan sounded pretty bizarre too, until it turned out there were tape recordings to back them up. Now what if there were also tape recordings showing that the entire time Thomas Morgan was cooking up his plot with Jimmy Seville, he was also working closely with detectives employed by the alleged victim, Sheriff Joe Arpaio? What if the sheriff's department's own tapes showed that detectives actually dictated to Morgan some of the stories that Seville says sucked him in? Impossible, right? Just wait and see.
We'll answer those questions when we return. In a moment, you'll hear more about those tapes, and you'll hear more from Seville, and you'll get to realize what had happened during those times when the volume was turned down. More of James Seville's story when we return. Stay with us. As you can imagine, the plot has thickened for this man, James Seville, As you may recall, if you've been watching the story, he was in jail years ago for threatening to blow up Sheriff Joe Arpaio through massive hours of audio tapes. Now you're going to hear more from the audio tapes and what the sheriff's office has to say. Once again, here's Josh Mankiewicz.
James Seville was sitting in jail, charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in a plot to blow up Arizona's most popular lawman, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Seville and his lawyers made a remarkable claim that even though he'd been caught on tape building a bomb and bragging about wanting to kill the sheriff, Seville had really been set up by a cellmate named Thomas Morgan, who threatened his life if he didn't assassinate Arpaio. He told you that you should.
He told me that I had to.
They found secret tape recordings made in prison by sheriff's investigators that seemed to support some of Seville's claims that Morgan was the driving force in the plot. But Seville's lawyer, Ulysses Farragut, makes another, even more serious claim, that the sheriff's office itself dictated much of what Morgan said on those tapes, in effect, helping to set up James Seville.
One of the fundamental requirements is that you not entrap the person by creating or suggesting the crime. And that's exactly what the sheriff's office did.
Was it possible the sheriff's department had helped railroad Jimmy Seville in a plot to assassinate the sheriff himself? It's the kind of thing no one would believe unless there was extremely convincing evidence, like, say, another trove of tape recordings, which is exactly what Seville's defense team obtained from the sheriff's department and shared with Dateline.
Prairieville Prison, we're going to talk to Thomas Morgan. Do you know what we're here about?
Pretty sure.
Okay.
June 30th, 1999, 9 days before Jimmy Seville would be released onto the streets of Phoenix, Maricopa County Sheriff's detectives were meeting for the first time with inmate Thomas Morgan, who said he had information that was, if you'll pardon the expression, explosive.
I'm in a cell with a nut, and he literally wants to kill his judge and his prosecutor. He just says he's going to send him a bomb and blow him up, kill him.
What's his name?
Seville.
Seville.
Right.
Farragut says Morgan had informed on cellmates before, trying to negotiate favorable treatment in return.
He had basically snitched on 2 other individuals in murder cases prior to Jimmy Seville.
Now Morgan was fingering Seville. Detectives had received this letter Morgan wrote to his minister 2 weeks before Seville was scheduled to be released. What I am about to tell you is very important and dangerous. I have recently learned of a plot to kill a Superior Court judge and a prosecutor. Morgan then goes on to name the intended victims. Names, you'll remember, Seville says Morgan wheedled out of it. The young man has given me explicit details on how he was going to do it. He is quite knowledgeable for his young age with explosives. I believe he knows what he is doing. Morgan says he has bomb diagrams, the ones Seville claims Morgan asked him to draw. Then, 3 paragraphs later, Morgan adds what seems like an afterthought. He talks about killing Sheriff Joe also.
It sounded like a very serious threat.
Jack McIntyre is chief counsel for the sheriff's office. He's talking to us because Sheriff Joe didn't want to. Because the threat mentioned specific names, you sort of took it as being more credible than otherwise.
Oh, sure.
It probably didn't hurt that the sheriff himself was one of the names. He happened to be both the most famous lawman in Arizona and the boss of the 2 detectives sent to interview Thomas Morgan. Is it any kind of conflict of interest, do you think, to have the sheriff's office investigating a threat against the sheriff?
I don't think there's any conflict there at all. That happens all the time. In every law enforcement agency.
That may be true, but it's also true that there may be no other law enforcement agency quite like the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Joe Arpaio is an elected official who's kept the highest profile he could create over the 12 years he's held office. His name is writ large on every facility he runs. His chain gang and tent city jail are known across the country. It's a rare week when Sheriff Joe is not quoted in the local news media. And a big part of his mystique is that Sheriff Joe fights crime despite constant threats on his life. The sheriff's office sent us a list of 10 people who've been convicted of threatening Sheriff Joe in just the last 5 years. Critics, like Ulysses Farragut, say that while some threats certainly are serious, the sheriff's department isn't above milking them for publicity.
Sort of the ego of, I'm important and people are out to get me. And his staff know this. In fact, he's got a whole unit dedicated towards threats, investigating threats.
Those two sheriff's investigators would have a pretty clear motive for focusing in on the plot to kill Sheriff Arpaio.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine? Hey, boss, look what we brought you. We come bearing gifts.
Farragut points to the fact that at the first meeting, Morgan did not even mention the sheriff until the detectives did.
Is that the only people he's threatened? Is the prosecutor?
Yeah, that's the only one he's openly talked about.
How about the one in the letter he talked about, he made threats to Sheriff Joe Arpaio?
Oh, he said he'd be a hero if he blew up Sheriff Joe.
Cops will tell you that an experienced informant like Thomas Morgan reads the signals about what information is wanted and what he can trade for favors. Doesn't the fact that the detectives bring up Sheriff Arpaio in that first meeting with Morgan, doesn't that send a signal to Thomas Morgan that this is what we're really interested in here?
You know, I think you could probably read it that way, but I think in all fairness, he talked about all three.
But as detectives began listening to and recording Morgan's talks with James Seville, the investigation seemed to focus solely on the famous sheriff.
More than he wants to judge, he wants to prosecute. He thrives on this prosecutor.
Not too many people know a prosecutor. He's not well known. Everybody knows Arpaio.
Listen to how detectives told Morgan to describe Yancey, the undercover detective they wanted Seville to call.
If we can get him hooked up with a guy that will say, call his name Yancey, he's got some money, and he might be able to make it worth your while to, you know, maybe make something for him, make a bomb, something like that, because
he'll do it.
he really wants Arpaio bad, because he doesn't like Arpaio at all.
I think he'd do it.
McIntyre says the detectives had to push hard and work quickly because Seville was about to be released from prison and they wanted to make sure they hooked him up with an undercover officer so they could keep track of him. But he also admits that when Seville was released from prison and did meet with Yancey, their bomb shopping spree was actually underwritten by the sheriff's office. Mr. Seville does not even have a driver's license. Mr. Yancey's driving. Who's paying for the bomb parts?
Well, I think it's Yancey.
Whose vehicle is it?
It's Yancey's.
That's not you guys making this happen?
Oh, no, we could have very well been driving them to the Circle K to get some Fritos, but Mr. Seville made the choices of what to get and where.
Good point. But what about the timing of the arrest? McIntyre admits Seville could have been arrested after he bought the first bomb part, or the last, or after he built the bomb, or after he took the money for doing that. Yet the undercover detective actually took Seville to a restaurant where the sheriff was having lunch, where the sheriff's car was parked, and where a local TV news crew had been tipped to show up with cameras rolling. Whether or not the investigation was legitimate, it's pretty tough to argue that the arrest was not planned for cameras.
It was pretty convenient to have a television crew that was there and available.
The defense now had a theory of the case that a cunning informant and a publicity-hungry sheriff's office conspired to entrap James Seville. They had audio tapes that supported some of their claims, but were they willing to bet Seville's life that a jury would believe them?
The judge told Jimmy and his family very directly. He said, son, I've been doing this for, over 30 years, and I can tell you that no one wins an entrapment defense.
The prosecution offered a deal, plead guilty to attempted aggravated assault, and be sentenced to 10 to 15 years. With time served, Seville could get out in as little as 6. For Ulysses Farragut, it was time for a gut check.
When I'm looking at an 18-year-old kid who is facing life in prison, I have a responsibility to say to him, Jimmy, as much as I believe in you and your family believes in you, you need to be cautious here.
Seville's mom, Rebecca, had the same painful realization. You were telling him, take the deal.
Yes, I was. I wanted him to have a life and not in prison.
By now, Jimmy Seville had been in jail for 4 years. A guilty plea meant at least 6 more. But in the end, he went for the deal.
And finally, I agreed to take it, because it was pretty stupid not to take it.
Seville pleaded guilty to the lesser charge, even though he and his family and his lawyers were all convinced he was not guilty. And then, as if this story weren't strange enough already,
we got to the office, and I get a phone call from the prosecutor. And he says, listen, there's a technical defect in the plea.
It was a tiny paperwork matter, a mistake in the reporting of Seville's criminal history. But the plea itself could not be finalized without correcting it. Farragut told the prosecutor he'd get back to him on making the change, but then the phone rang again. This time it was the sheriff's sergeant who had been in charge of surveillance on the day of Jimmy Seville's arrest, and who was no fan of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's regime.
And he starts telling me, he says, look, I don't feel good about the investigation, and I don't feel good about your client taking a plea. And as he starts telling me this, I start scrambling for a tape recorder.
In a case full of key moments caught on tape, here's the capper.
I mean, if I've ever seen anybody coerce or set out, it was...
And you think it was all for sort of the publicity angle for the sheriff?
Well, look at the news cameras that were there at the time of the arrest.
Farragut rushed to the jail and told Seville.
And I said, listen, here's the scenario. You've got a bad plea, and we've got an undercover officer that says it's a bad case. What do you want to do? And Jimmy said, I want out of my plea.
What did the prosecutor say when you said, I want to void the plea agreement?
Basically, are you crazy? We've got him on tape making a bomb. Are you crazy?
And you said?
We might be.
And they might be crazy. Coming up, the conclusion to the story as the jury looks at the thickened plot. Stay with us. And now the conclusion to our story. James Seville had been in jail for 4 years for aggravated murder, being threatening to blow up Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the toughest sheriff ever in America. But his own attorney went to him to say, what do you want to do? He wanted to back out. Remember, before all this, stacks and stacks and stacks of audio tapes have been sky high filled with him making the bomb, buying the parts, and a news TV camera waiting to have Seville arrested. Now it'd be in the hands of the jury. Just how the plot, how thick would the plot be in order for this kind of stuff to happen? Once again, Josh Mankiewicz.
Were you nervous during the trial?
I was kind of happy because for the whole time I was in there, I was determined to go to trial.
James Seville had been in jail 4 years, awaiting trial for allegedly conspiring to murder one of Arizona's most popular elected officials, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. He'd been caught on tape building a bomb intended for the sheriff, but he claimed he'd been entrapped, coerced into committing the crime by a jailhouse informant and by the sheriff's department itself. The sheriff's lawyer, Jack McIntyre, thought Seville's entrapment claim was patently bogus.
It was a creation that was made strictly for the point of view of presenting it to a jury and seeing if they'll bite on that hook.
In a pretrial deposition, the informant, Thomas Morgan, said the murder plot was all Seville's idea, that he, Morgan, did not exaggerate it to win favors, nor did the detectives tell him to do it.
At no time did they tell me to entrap this kid. At no time did they tell me to entice this kid.
Now a jury would decide whether Morgan was lying or whether Seville was. The trial took 5 weeks. Jurors heard tape after scratchy tape. They heard sheriff's detectives seeming to instruct their informant to play up the threat on Sheriff Joe.
So not too many people know prosecutor. He's not well known. Everybody knows Arpaio.
They heard Morgan chat up Seville about killing Sheriff Joe. They heard sheriff's detectives proposing to set Seville up with a friend on the outside.
Third part.
A supposed hitman who was really an undercover detective.
And he might be able to make it worth your while to, maybe make something for him to make a bomb.
something like that.
On the other hand, they also heard Jimmy Seville crowing about his bomb-making skills.
He's not a real pyro, but I do like blowing things up. It's about time I get paid for it.
Seville's defense got some unexpected help from informant Thomas Morgan, who had made a surprising statement to prison officials shortly after Seville's arrest. Quote, Morgan started talking about how Seville was entrapped, states Seville was set up by the sheriff's department. In his sworn deposition, Thomas Morgan performed another wild about-face, claiming that he was just playing yet another angle for better treatment behind bars.
My statement was to this effect: if you don't get somebody down here to do something with me, then I'm going to turn this whole thing around and make it seem like an entrapment case.
Who do you trust? Morgan, the convicted con man and veteran informant who claimed he was just doing his civic duty? Or Seville, the convicted would-be arsonist, accused would-be assassin who claimed he was coerced into building a bomb? Or maybe Wayne Scoville, the sheriff's sergeant who had called Seville's lawyer with his doubts about the investigation.
It's the worst case I've ever seen. It's a complete entrapment. The informant really ran the show.
The case went to the jury on June 12, 2003. Seville's lawyer, Ulysses Farragut, was nervous.
I had a very good sense that we presented the case well, but you never know what a jury's going to do.
Working very hard.
Jury foreperson Fausta Woody and juror Darla Wright said Thomas Morgan's testimony actually hurt the prosecution. Thomas Morgan sort of cast himself as a good citizen.
He did.
You think Thomas Morgan was a good citizen?
No.
They were surprised to find James Seville credible.
He was very open and honest about the entire thing. They could not catch him in one single lie.
And Detective Scoville was the icing on the cake.
He said this kid was entrapped from the beginning. That was the end of the case.
Jimmy Seville had been in jail for 4 years. Friday the 13th turned out to be his lucky day.
We, the jury, do find the defendant not guilty of count 1.
And they read the verdict and they say not guilty. And do you realize that's it? You get out of jail, it's the end?
I was too happy to realize anything.
His mom, Rebecca, who believed in him all those years.
It was the best thing I'd heard in the longest time. Not guilty. It means he's coming home.
And it means he's not a murderer.
That's right.
Most emotional of all, believe it or not, his attorney. You didn't think you were going to win.
Didn't know.
You've been in how many criminal trials?
A lot.
And yet you're getting emotional over this one.
Yeah.
How come?
Because I knew in my heart he was innocent. I knew it. The question was, could I prove it?
But prove it he did. The jury found that James Seville had been entrapped. Under Arizona law, that meant the jury believed that Seville never would have committed the crime unless the sheriff's office or their informant, Thomas Morgan, gave Seville the idea and convinced him to carry it out. It was a decisive verdict, and one that did not sit well with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Sheriff Arpaio spoke to the local media immediately after the verdict. He adamantly denied that his department entrapped James Seville and said as far as he was concerned, Seville was guilty. But even though Sheriff Arpaio is usually one of the most accessible public figures you'll find, he declined our request for an interview about this case, in which a jury came to believe his department framed a young man in order to produce a high-profile arrest. Should this case have ever reached a courtroom?
It should have never occurred, period.
There may yet be another trial in this case. James Seville is suing the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Joe Arpaio himself for gross negligence and malicious prosecution, allegations the sheriff and his office deny. Seville, once considered the perp, now says he was the victim of a cagey informant and the sheriff's office itself.
Morgan, he's a criminal, He's expected to do it. But for the people who covered it up and sheltered him, I think, maybe they're to blame, The ones that made his plot work, who knew what he was doing, and he'll just cover it up and call me a liar for all those years.
As we mentioned, we did ask for an interview with Sheriff Arpaio. He declined, citing James Seville's pending lawsuit. The sheriff was re-elected to his 4th term last November.
Wow. So to watching this story, you think there might be some common sense? There is. Making threats like that can send you to jail. If you've been watching our school threats episodes about the broadcast, if you make a school threat or any threat, that can lead you to jail time. And even parents may even pay fines. But when you have people doing stuff like this, it's like you must be like going to jail. You must really love going to jail. Jail is bad. Bad for people. And I really don't like people sitting there in jail doing damn well nothing while sitting up here and not ever doing a damn thing. The common sense perspective is this: don't be making threats. And if you do not like this sheriff, don't be blasting his social media account threatening to blow him up or this and this, because that can land you to a lot of trouble. Conspiracy to make a threat under the state of Arizona. That's jail time. And I'm glad he pleaded not guilty. But if he admitted to it, but if the sheriff's department admitted to it, then they may come out and say, "Hey, we're sorry." But it's up to them to just say, "Let's just cover it up, and then let's just do this. We'll cover it up, and then we'll deny it. We don't care." I really hope this lawsuit goes forward, but. You know what's not going to go... You know what will go forward? Tonight's viral break. You may remember this season we showed you a guy named Greg with over a lot of views. Here's a video, a short video of him when he rages breaks the controller.
You gotta be kidding me! How did I die? It's this stupid laggy controller! Hey, wait a minute, that's my controller! Who cares? It was a crappy one anyway. That's it, I'm telling Dad on you. Hey Dad, what's going on over here? I spent over $100 on that controller. Who broke it? He broke it. Yeah, I did it. But only because the controller sucked. You ever stop to think that maybe you suck? How about that, son? That's not true. Boy, go grab his controller and bring it back to me. Already got it. An eye for an eye, right, son? What the heck? Are you crazy? How am I supposed to play games now? Dad, you bought that controller for him, remember? You're both grounded. Come on! You gotta be kidding me! 3 chapters ago, I decided to save this guy's...
What are you doing with the pregnancy pillow in the living room?
Alright. That was actually one of my favorites. But what I can tell you is what's come up in our next video. Come up on Friday, it's the first Flashback Friday of 2024. My top 10 favorite Dateline stories throughout the years of this broadcast. From the foster care story, to the person who had eye surgery, who was at the eye center, to the escalator story. My top 10 favorite Dateline stories of all time. Seen here on this broadcast. Not all, portions. And I will explain why they're my favorites. That's it for this first Throwback Thursday of 2024. We'll see you again soon for our next Throwback Thursday, which will be very, very, very soon. And we'll see you again for Give Me Back Friday. A very special Flashback Friday. And also coming soon on this broadcast, it's the story about a man who went to jail, escaped from jail, then changed his name. And it would take a reporter to figure out his real name. what was going on. Josh Mankiewicz with The Fugitive. That's coming up soon. Good night.